Hello, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 31st episode in a Naruto Uzumaki story in which a few little changes might have a significant impact. Knowledge provided early in Naruto's career converted him from a hopeless loser to a powerful and skilled shinobi. Historical differences that have long ago passed have resulted in a totally different consequence than we imagined. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. To begin, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get the party started. Obito could only curse his bad luck as he was forced to run, racing through the forest by leaping from branch to branch. Despite being almost silent, the people chasing after him were able to easily keep on top of him. Maybe they were following his scent. Perhaps they were tracking his chakra. He didn't know. What he did know was that if he didn't keep moving, he'd be in big trouble. A silent alarm went off in his head. A warning of impending danger. Cursing, Obito quickly activated his Sharingan to become intangible. He was just in time to avoid being skewered by a large claw of purple chakra. The owner of said claw fell to the ground below and looked up at him. Emotionless were eyes visible beneath the fringe of blonde hair as the Nibi's Jinchuriki crouched low and prepared to attack again. Swearing to himself, Obito kept leaping through the trees. He frowned as the woman below leapt back onto the branches like a cat and followed him. He had no idea how these Kumgokure shinobi had discovered his location, nor did he know why they were chasing him. Well, he was wearing the Akatsuki cloak. That was probably reason enough. Still, they should have never been able to find his base. Where is Zetsu? He had no idea where his partner was. They'd been forced to split up when their base had been struck by several explosions and a group of Kumagakure ninja had come pouring in. Normally, this wouldn't have deterred Obito, who was confident he could handle just about anything. But that was only in a normal situation. When the Hokage and the Jinchurikis for the Hachibi and Nibi attacked him, Obito knew that sticking around to fight would be unwise. One of them he could probably take on. Two of them was pushing it. Three was out of the question. So he and Zetsu had run. A loud crackling sound from behind alerted Obito to more danger. He could feel the static electricity of a lightning jutsu at his back, a powerful surge that caused his skin to crawl. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Obito used Doten Mogaragakure no Jutsu to escape from the powerful lariat technique of the fourth Hokage. As the tree he'd been standing on was demolished, blasted apart like it was a castle made of sand, Obito appeared on the ground several meters away. The Hachibi's Jinchuriki was waiting for him. Raiten, Rariato, Lightning Release, Lariat. The Hachibi's Jinchuriki coated his arm in lightning nature chakra and extended it to strike Obito in the chest, but it didn't hit. Instead of being struck dumb, Obito made himself intangible again and the Jinchuriki sailed straight through him. This didn't end the assault. Before Obito even had time to use another jutsu, the Nibi's Jinchuriki was there. As he dodged the Jinchuriki's attacks, he activated Kamui, a space-time ninjutsu that created a spiraling void centered around his eye. The area around them became distorted, swirling eddies appearing before them, and the Nibi Jinchuriki was drawn inward toward the distortion. It was too bad he never got the chance to complete his ninjutsu. Before he could trap the Nibi's Jinchuriki within the Kamui's dimension, something powerful struck him from behind. At that same instant, the Nibi's Jinchuriki attacked with a powerful claw swipe, but Obito managed to use his right eye to become intangible. The woman passed through him again without damaging him. However, one could say that even though he hadn't been injured, the damage had already been done. The Nibi and Hachibi Jinchurikis, along with the Hokage, were surrounding him in a triangle formation. He glanced to his left, at the Hachibi's Jinchuriki, then to his right at the Nibi's Jinchuriki. The Hokage was behind him. It was that man who'd landed a powerful blow to Obito's head while he was trying to deal with the Nibi. Wearing a frown that grew with each passing second, Obito wondered if he should pretend to play the fool like he usually did. However, he didn't think that sort of role-playing would work here. These people hadn't spoken a single word since they attacked his base. It was unusual. He'd heard that Killer Bee, the Hachibi's Jinchuriki, was quite talkative and often created rhymes while in the middle of combat. Seeing him so quiet was startling. Something isn't right. Of course, he'd known that something was wrong from the moment they attacked. Not only had they launched an assault on his base, which no one should have known about, but when he'd tried to teleport away using his right eye, he'd found himself unable to. It wasn't that the eye wasn't working. It did work. Obito had been able to absorb several ninjutsu that had been launched at him. However, when he tried to teleport himself to escape, he couldn't for reasons that escaped him. Every time he tried, some outside force would exert influence over his ability and keep him from teleporting. The problem was he couldn't figure out who was interfering or even how they were able to interfere. No one should have been able to mess with his Sharingan abilities, except maybe Kakashi. However, Kakashi was not here. Without warning, the Nibi's Jinchuriki fired several flaming balls of hair surrounded by blue fire. The hairball transformed into the shape of a mouse, and then broke apart into several single hairs. Obito could feel the heat from where he stood. He became intangible, allowing the hairs to pass through him, but then the hair turned around and came at him from behind. With a grimace, he ceased being intangible and activated his other Kamui ability, creating a distortion in the air to absorb the technique into his Kamui's dimension. Obito only realized this had been a distraction when the Hachibi's Jinchuriki and the Raikage launched simultaneous attacks at him. They came in from in front and behind. Raiten, Dabu Arariato, Lightning Release, Double Lariat. Obito realized within a split second that he couldn't reactivate his intangibility jutsu to avoid this attack. He also knew what would happen if he got hit. With barely a second to spare, he activated the Doden, Moguregekure no Jutsu to travel underground. Even then, he came so close to being hit that he could feel the attack grazing his mask before he disappeared underneath the Earth's surface. Appearing several dozen meters away, Obito gasped for breath as he began running again. He needed to lose these people. At the very least, he needed to find a way to fight them separately. Realizing they had missed him, the trio of high-level ninja took off after him, beginning their game of cat and mouse once more. Obito did everything in his power to avoid being demolished by them. He used more than just Kamui to keep himself alive, relying on ninjutsu he hadn't used in the last several years. Despite relying primarily on the eye techniques of the Mangekyo Sharingan for combat, Obito had a number of powerful ninjutsu at his disposal. As the three ninja came at him, he went through a series of hand seals, sucked in a deep breath, and released it. Kaden, Gokakyu no Jutsu. Obito expelled a massive orb of fire from his mouth. The fireball was truly gigantic, easily twice the size of Obito himself, and it soared through the air toward the Nibi's Jinchuriki as she descended from the sky like an attacking angel. While he did not expect the attack to kill her, he had at least expected it to damage her or force her to dodge, but then she sliced through the technique with her elongated claws coated in her by Ju's chakra. Obito could not stop himself from feeling both shocked and annoyed. What would it take to defeat these three? The Hachibi and Raikage were coming at him from the left and right. Obito went through more hand seals and needed chakra inside of his body. Katen, Bakufu Rambu, Fire Arlies, Bomb Blast Dance. He launched more fire from his mouth, though this technique took the form of a large stream. The blaze was drawn into a spiral, which engulfed the Raikage, causing his body to disappear from view. Seconds after his technique concluded, the Hachibi's Jinchuriki came at him, body covered in a thick layer of his Baiju's chakra, 8 red tails writhing behind him as horns formed on his head. Raiten, Rariato. With his arm extended, the Hachibi's Jinchuriki used the bull horns formed from his chakra cloak to attack Obito. However, by that point, Obito was able to become intangible again. The Jinchuriki passed right through him, slamming into a tree and demolishing. He didn't stop there. The one known as Killer Bee blasted apart several more trees, and then destroyed a boulder. Obito glanced at the destruction caused by the technique as he deactivated his intangibility jutsu. He couldn't afford to have it remain active since he could only keep it up for 5 minutes a day. His inborn senses warned him of danger just in time to barely avoid being struck by an arm coated in lightning chakra. A tingling sensation like static electricity lit up his spine as he leaned back, avoiding the attack by a hair's breadth. He quickly activated Doden, Moguregekure no Jutsu to disappear beneath the earth and reappear several meters away. However, the moment he appeared again, the Raikage was already on him. The Raikage's entire body had become wrapped in a layer of lightning chakra. Crackling electricity sizzled as it blasted around his body in arcs. Obito was only able to catch a glimpse of the man before he disappeared again. Obito was forced to become intangible again, lest he find himself being crushed by the now almost impossible to see Raikage. This is the technique that allowed him to keep up with Konoha's yellow flash. Of course Obito knew of this technique, the Raiten no Yoroi, a jutsu that coated a person in lightning armor that stimulated the nervous system and increased their overall physical capabilities and reflexes to nearly unheard of heights. This was not good. If the Raikage used this technique, then Obito would be forced to remain intangible until his 5-minute time limit ran out. Doing his best to escape, Obito found himself blocked not only by the Raikage with his now activated lightning armor, but also by the two Jinchuriki. The Hachibi and Nibi had transformed into their version 2 Baiju modes. Using their bodies as a sort of endoskeleton, a dark red, Nearly black layer of chakra had enveloped them. They looked almost like miniature versions of the beast sealed inside of them. The two Jinchuriki attacked Obito simultaneously with the Raikage, forcing him to keep his intangibility jutsu up. They weren't just physical attacks either. Both Jinchuriki released massive balls of negative chakra that slammed into the ground all around Obito, exploding with so much force that it would have been impossible to survive had he not become intangible. He weathered the storm as best he could. His intangibility jutsu soon ended. Fortunately, the numerous explosions by the Baijudama attacks, the beast bombs, ceased. Unfortunately, before he could escape, someone grabbed him from behind. As Obito was lifted into the air by the Raikage, he caught a glimpse of someone out of his peripheral vision. That person had pale skin, long black hair, and wore a kimono with a purple rope tying it together. He recognized that person. It was Orochimaru. However, unlike the Orochimaru that he had known, this one had black eyes with a red six-pointed star-shaped pattern in each eye. That's a Mangekyo Sharingan? No, it's an eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. All this flashed before his eyes like a bolt of lightning. Time seemed to slow as the fourth Raikage used his extreme strength to bring Obito's head toward the ground. In those last few seconds of life, Obito realized why he couldn't use his Kamui ability to teleport, and why these three were chasing after him. Orochimaru must have somehow realized who he was, or perhaps he was just being cautious, but in either event, this man had used his previous association with Akatsuki to locate him and attack. Now, having likely killed Sasuke and Itachi to acquire the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he was disposing of any force that could potentially oppose him. Damn it all. Seconds after that, the ground around him shattered as he was smashed headfirst into the ground. Rin. I failed to change the world. I'm sorry. Orochimaru walked over to the three ninja as they released their respective techniques. The Raikage's lightning armor vanished, and the red aura surrounding the two Jinchuriki disappeared. The area around them was one of devastation. The Baijudama attacks from Killer Bee and Yugito had created a massive crater that was easily 100 meters in diameter. Below the crater was cracked and upturned earth. It was like after being struck by a meteor, an earthquake had ravaged the surrounding area. The three Kumagakure ninja were surrounding the now dead Obito Uchiha, who Orochimaru had learned about after thoroughly interrogating Itachi. Thanks to that interrogation, Orochimaru now knew where most, if not every, Akatsuki hideout was located. Several Kumagakure squads had been sent out to raid some of them. Ishidate and his two cohorts were also raiding one of the hideouts. Good work, you three, Orochimaru congratulated the three ninja on a job well done. DCH. The Raikage looked displeased as he rotated his shoulders. I'm not sure why you had all three of us take care of this shrimp. I think any one of us could have defeated him on our own. Perhaps. Orochimaru smiled. However, I'd rather not take any chances. This man is quite slippery. Even if you were able to defeat him, he'd probably just run away. Humph. I guess. Yo. He was pretty wily. It took us a long time to defeat him, Killer Bee rapped. I am surprised that it took so long for three ninja of our caliber to defeat one person, Yugito agreed. He didn't seem very strong, but that's probably because he was up against all three of us. The battle might have been different if it was just one of us. Humph. Orochimaru hid his smile as he observed the three shinobi. None of them had any idea that he was controlling their every action with a Sharingan. Whenever they looked at him, each of them saw someone different, someone who they would give deferential treatment to. He didn't even know what they saw himself. His jutsu was reliant upon the memories of the ninja he was controlling. His genjutsu was also so strong that none of them even suspected they might be trapped in one. That was the frightening thing about the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan's genjutsu. Even cage-level ninja like these three had no idea that their thoughts and actions were being manipulated because of a genjutsu. It was even stronger for the Jinchuriki because the Sharingan was so adept at controlling them. In either event, we've dealt a serious blow to Akatsuki, Orochimaru said. Let's head back to Kumagakure. The three ninja acknowledged his orders with a loud hi. Before leaping out of the crater and heading into the trees, Orochimaru watched them go, making sure they were out of sight, before turning his head to stare at a spot on the ground. It looked no different than the rest of the area. However, Orochimaru smiled at it. Have you anything to report, Kabuto? A man appeared before Orochimaru, kneeling on the ground. His ash-gray hair was tied into a ponytail, and he wore the same dark purple shirt with a high collar, white undershirt, and dark purple pants. A white cloth wrapped around his torso. I regret to inform you that Zetsu has escaped. Kabuto remained with his head bowed, not daring to look up. He used a jutsu that allowed him to travel underground. We lost his chakra signature the moment that happened. Orochimaru pondered that for a moment, absently stroking his chin. While it is regrettable that Zetsu escaped, I do not think we'll need to worry about him. On his own, he cannot do much. He'll likely regroup with the last two members of Akatsuki. However, now that I have the power of these eyes, we can take care of them later. Should I return to Otogakure and prepare our forces? Asked Kabuto. Yes, I believe that would be for the best. If we plan on launching an attack on Konoha, then I'll need to combine the forces of Kumagakure with Otogakure. Konoha is far too powerful for one village to take on alone, but with the combined forces now at my disposal, I believe we can begin moving with my plan to crush my former village. He paused, his smile growing wider. Of course, we'll let Kumagakure lead the charge. Zox Naruto stirred from slumber, opening his eyes just a crack to reveal a wooden ceiling overhead. It didn't look like any ceiling he'd ever seen. It was too organic. Rather than a ceiling, he would have said it looked like the inside of a hollowed-out tree. He blinked a couple of times. Where was he? His body felt heavy as he tried to move his limbs. It felt like he was wearing the weights that Rock Lee always wore, only heavier. You shouldn't get up. You might have been able to survive the unsealing thanks to the fact that you were no longer human, but your body is still suffering from numerous side effects. A soft, feminine voice spoke up and caused Naruto to look in the direction it came from. Sitting beside him was a beautiful woman with red hair, red eyes, and 6 furry fox tails. A pair of red ears sat on her head, twitching every few seconds. She was gorgeous. Her crimson locks traveled all the way down to her butt. A pair of bangs framed her face, which would have put any aristocrat to shame. Enchanting crimson eyes. Lush ruby lips. Her simple dress was the only thing that seemed out of place. The shirt was a boring shade of brown, and her pants were a light tan. Somehow, the dullness of her clothing made her beauty all the more striking. "Akane," Naruto mumbled. "Naruto," she said. The ensuing silence that extended between the two of them felt stifling. Naruto wanted to say something, but he had no idea what to say. She had ignored him for the longest time, and he had never figured out why. Now that she was here, sitting before him, he had so much wanted to talk about, to ask her, but he couldn't even figure out what he should say first. He was drawing a blank. Where are we?" he asked, deciding to broach those topics later. "I do not know," Akane answered simply. "However, I do know that we were brought here by someone. She is away right now, but she said she'd be back to bring us lunch. Do you know who that person is?" he asked. She shook her head. "I did not get a chance to ask her name. I only just woke up about half an hour ago myself." "Oh." Naruto trailed off again, his face scrunching up as he tried to think about what he could say. So, how are you feeling?" "How do I feel?" The great Baiju, who had taken the form of a beautiful woman, looked down at herself. She raised her hands, clenching and unclenching her fingers, and then she sighed. "I am a lot weaker now than I prefer. I think the only time I felt weaker than this was when you stole nearly all my power after Orochimaru tried to screw with your seal. 3 of my tails were stolen by Yami. That said, I am feeling mostly fine, all things considered. I do enjoy the fact that I am no longer tied to that seal." "I guess you would enjoy being free," Naruto admitted quietly. "Sorry you had to stick with me for so long." Akane clicked her tongue. "What sort of apology is that? If I was bothered by being stuck with you, I would have tried a lot harder to manipulate you into releasing the seal." The woman looked away, placed her hands on her lap, and clutched the fabric of her pants. "Anyway, the one who should be apologizing is probably me." "You?" I got very angry when you slept with Koyuki and decided to shut you out of the seal," Akane finally admitted. "I didn't want to talk to you after that because, seeing you with that woman made me angry. For some reason, I felt like ignoring you after that." Naruto stared, not quite sure he understood what Akane was talking about, but as her words slowly trickled through his brain, he found himself unable to come up with a proper response for several seconds. Seriously? What did someone say to this? "So, you were jealous?" "I wasn't jealous." Snapping, Akane glared at Naruto, who returned her look with a deadpan expression. Slowly but surely, his expression caused Akane's to shift, becoming more and more uncertain, until she at last looked away. Finally, in a soft voice, she sighed and said, "Okay. I was jealous. I didn't like how these other women were getting close to you." Naruto wasn't sure what he should say to that, so he spent a moment looking around the room, what he could see of it lying down at least. The room was very basic. The floor, Walls and ceiling was made of wood, and it had a really organic feel, making him think the room might truly be a hollowed-out tree. A dresser sat several meters to his left. There was also a window on his right. Naruto realized that he was lying on a futon, which explained how Akane could sit Caesar before him. 2 other futons were lying in the room. One likely belonged to Akane. "Hey, Akane," Naruto said at last. "What am I to you?" Akane bit her lip and cast her gaze about the room, as if seeking something that would allow her to avoid the subject. Naruto waited. At some point, she seemed to accept that there was no escape, or maybe she had realized that this was something they needed to talk about. Her shoulders slumped. "I do not know. While I have seduced many men into doing my bidding, I was never intimate with any of them, and I have never felt this way about any of them. I just know that I did not like it when that woman got to you before I did." "Before you got to me? What does that mean?" Akane sighed. "Please don't act like you're dense. I know you're not that stupid." Naruto gave her a sheepish smile. "Sorry. I just wanted to hear it in your own words." Fine." Puffing her cheeks out a little, Akane gave Naruto a frightfully adorable pout. "Being as old as I am, and having seduced many powerful men in my time, I'm not upset that you slept with Koyuki and those other women. However, I had been planning on eventually making you mine. I disliked that they got to you first. And that's why you shut me out?" Akane looked away, her cheeks bright red. It was obvious if he thought about it. Akane was the QB, a prideful creature who had lived for a long time. Admitting that she was jealous was probably a huge blow to her pride. What made it even worse was that the people who sparked her jealousy were humans who, even to this day, she did not care for. "I'm sorry," Naruto apologized sincerely. "I had no idea you felt that way." "Yeah, well," Akane sighed as her shoulders fell. "It's not like you could have known. I only decided to make you mine after watching you grow during the training trip. My plan was to wait until after your training to seduce you, but then Koyuki managed to do it first." Naruto was feeling a bit better now, so he pushed himself into a sitting position and turned to Akane. She observed him with a frown that was both defensive and uncertain. He took a deep breath. "Is that offer still open?" Akane averted her eyes. "It is. If you want to become mine. You know I won't stop seeing those girls until old age or a mission takes them, right?" "I know. Are you okay with that?" Akane hesitated for a moment. "I have already said it before, haven't I? I have seduced a lot of people in my life. Men. Women. If I were to say I disliked you being with other women, it would make me a hypocrite. I do not mind. I'll probably even join you. I just don't like that someone aside from me took your first time." In that case. Now that he knew her feelings, Naruto felt no hesitation as he leaned forward and kissed Akane. It was a little difficult. His arms wobbled as he used them to support his weight. However, as he felt Akane's softer than chiffon lips slide over his, the exhaustion in his limbs seemingly vanished. Ahem. However, just before the kiss could heat up, a cough interrupted them. Akane and Naruto removed themselves from each other and looked over at the door. An androgynous girl was standing there, left hand on her hip and a grin on her face. "Should I leave so you two can have some more time alone?" she asked, her cheeks only a mild shade of red. Zox. After that embarrassing interlude where their savior had walked in on them, the trio ended up sitting around a small fire pit that had been built into the ground. It had been hidden underneath several wooden planks that could be removed. The girl who had rescued them was a dark-skinned teen. Her petite body was covered in a short, sleeveless white midriff shirt and fishnet armor underneath, long white armlets, and fishnet shorts with a short white apron skirt wrapped around her hips. She wore her forehead protector, which featured the waterfall symbol for Takigakuer, around her right arm. She had been carrying a large, cylindrical object in red wrapping on her back when she'd come in, but that object now lay discarded against the wall. "Man. I was so surprised to find you. I never imagined we'd run into each other again." The girl laughed as she poked at the fish she was cooking. The fish sat over a metal grill that had been placed on top of the fire. "I didn't think we'd run into each other like this either, Fu," Naruto admitted. "Do you know this girl, Naruto?" asked Akane, aka QB. "We only met once." Naruto nodded at the fiery redhead sitting next to him. "It was a few months after Uro. After Jiraiya-sensei and I left Yukinokuni. We ended up traveling to Taki at some point, where Shibuki introduced us to Fu. We didn't really get to talk much," Fu added with a joyous smile. "But it was really nice getting to meet another person like me. Oh, speaking of..." As the girl trailed off, she switched from gazing at Naruto to looking at Akane. Nanabi says that you're the QB. Is that true? Akane's 6 tails, the amount she had left after Yami stole them from her, were lying in her lap. She'd been grooming them, which had been a bit of an odd sight. She mostly ran her fingers through the soft-looking fur. However, occasionally, she would tail one of her tails and lick it or nibble on the top. It was very animalistic. At the question posed, Akane stopped grooming her tails to look at Fu. I am the QB, yes, Fu snapped her fingers and grinned. I knew it. I was really curious about when we found you cause you have those tails, and I don't know any human who has tails. But I was still really shocked when Nanabi told me that you were the QB. Fu finished grilling up the fish, which she only flavored with a bit of salt, and then stuck them on a set of sticks and handed 2 to Naruto and 2 to Akane. She took the last 2 for herself. The group ate in silence for a moment. Naruto used the time to gobble the fish up quickly, while Akane ate hers with the sort of daintiness he would have expected from a princess. It was almost cute to watch her nose scrunch up as she tasted the fish. Come to think of it, this was actually the first time she'd eaten in centuries, wasn't it? When they finished their meal, Fu crossed her legs and leaned over to look at them. Her eyes were sparkling. Naruto and even Akane leaned back as if her proximity startled them. So, Fu began in an enthusiastic voice. How did you escape from the seal? And how are you still alive after Kyuubi escaped from the seal? I thought it was impossible to remove a Baijuu without killing the host. That's what everyone says. Is that not the case? Can Baijuu be removed without killing the host, or is there something special about you too? The girl began launching a series of questions at a rapid-fire rate, leaving Akane and Naruto no room to answer her. She seemed inordinately interested in learning about their circumstances. Of course she would be. Fu was the Jinchuriki for the 7-tailed beetle, the Nanabi. As a Jinchuriki herself, it only made sense that she'd be interested in learning how Akane had escaped from the seal. To be completely honest, neither of us really know exactly how this all worked out. Naruto began, however. Naruto did his best to explain the circumstances behind Akane being free from the seal. He didn't tell her about how they had infiltrated Amigacore, but he did talk a lot about how he'd faced off against Yami, his dark half, and how his mother had helped him. Fu didn't really seem to understand that part and asked many questions like how can your mother help you battle your dark side? Or what is a chakra imprint? However, by the end of his tale, Fu seemed to have a general idea of what transpired. The girl cupped her chin in thought, her face scrunching up sort of like Naruto's did when he was thinking. She flapped her knees a bit as though releasing an excess of energy while she thought. After a moment, she posed a question. Do you think it would be possible for me to unseal the Nanabi? Naruto had no idea how to answer that question, so he turned to Akane, who slowly shook her head. No, I doubt you'd be able to unseal the Nanabi at least, you wouldn't be able to unseal the Nanabi and survive. Akane paused, looked at Naruto and, upon receiving his nod, turned back to Fu. Naruto's constitution is unique. He's not fully human anymore because he absorbed a large portion of my chakra back when he was taking the Chunin exams. I call him a Hanyo, though the word itself is incorrect because I'm not a demon. In either event, what happened to Naruto is unlikely to happen to anyone else. The circumstances behind his transformation are wholly unique and due in large part to how a seal was designed. It is doubtful that they can be replicated. Fu took a moment to ponder her words. She sat there with her left elbow resting against her knee, her head sitting on the palm of her hand, staring at Akane like the woman was speaking a foreign language. After a few seconds, she leaned back, placing her hands behind her. Huh. Well, that sucks. The blunt words spoken caused Akane to grace her with a bitter smile. You say that, but Naruto will now be forced to live forever. The people he knows and loves will all eventually die, leaving him alone, and even if he meets new people, they too will eventually leave him. Can you say with all honesty that you want to live like that? Fu bit her lip. Well, I guess that would kind of suck. I mean, I don't have many friends, but I like Shibuki, and it would be really sad if I outlived him. The longer you live, the more jaded you become. Akane looked down at her hands. Her nails were quite long and slightly pointed like claws. She flexed them, then sighed. You see all of the things people do to each other. You see them murder, rape, pillage, and steal, and you begin to realize that humans are basically scum. After that, you stop caring about them. They become toys for your own amusement. As you slowly begin to use them as playthings, you lose sight of who you were without ever realizing it. Akane finally looked up to stare at the silent Fu. I didn't realize it until long after I was sealed inside of Naruto. As he stared at the woman who had lived for several centuries, Naruto reflected on her words. He had already known that Akane had become jaded and cynical. When they had first met, she had been insufferable and treated him like he was a burden. As they slowly warmed up to each other, she had shared stories with him about all of the things she had done, completely unremorseful even after telling him about the humans she had used for her own amusement, about the wars she had caused for her own entertainment. However, that wasn't all she had shared. Akane had told him about her life when she first created her human form. She had a mother and a father, and they treated her well. Of course, she had known that she was different and kept a distance between them. However, the smile on her face as she talked about the village she was raised in was the only genuine smile she ever gave when speaking of her past. Every other smile was cynical and cold. Yeah. Fu nodded slowly. That doesn't sound too fun. No. Akane's bitter smile was still on her face. It does not. It was only around noon at the moment, so after everyone had their fill of fish, Naruto offered to help Fu with some of her household chores. While the term household chores was a bit of a misnomer, it was true that she had a lot of things to do like airing out the futons, hanging up her laundry, and cleaning the small hut that she lived in. On side note, Naruto learned that her hut was actually the remains of a hollowed-out tree. Naruto had also finally realized that he and Akane were on the outskirts of Takigakure. He had no idea how they had gotten there, whether Fu had carried them all the way to her home from wherever they had been, or if they had somehow been nearby and Fu just happened to find them. He remembered very little after the battle with Pain, so he guessed it was possible that he'd merely traveled that far without realizing it. They spent 2 days with Fu. During that time, Naruto did what he could to help out. Akane didn't at first, but perhaps out of boredom or a desire not to feel left out, she began helping them as well. Sadly, Akane couldn't actually do much. It was a bit amusing to see a several thousand-year-old and supremely powerful entity fail at cooking. Naruto knew it was because Akane had never actually done anything for herself. She charmed humans into doing everything for her, which meant she'd never once had to do any work a single day in her life unless he considered seducing men and women work. He didn't. Despite this, Akane proved to be incredibly stubborn and refused to give up after failing. Maybe it was because she was stubborn. The first time she cooked the fish, she burnt them so badly they were inedible and Naruto sent some clones to catch more fish. After that, she demanded to cook every single day. When he was helping Fu with her chores, he'd see Akane glaring at the grill as she cooked fish, trying to get that perfect blend of crispy skin and soft insides. Fortunately, she did manage to learn how to cook fish after several failures. Shibuki also came by once. Naruto wasn't surprised when the man showed up the day after he and Akane had woken up. Fu would have obviously told her village leader about them. As the leader of Takigakure, Shibuki was a busy man, so he didn't stay long, but he did state that he was glad to see Naruto alive and requested an information briefing on what happened. While Naruto couldn't tell him everything, he did inform Shibuki that his injuries and Akane's presence were thanks to his battle against Akatsuki. Finally, the time had come for him and Akane to leave. "Take care of yourselves," Fu shouted as she waved at them. "Bye." Naruto waved back as he and Akane walked away from Fu. Unlike him, his companion didn't really wave, though she did turn her head and raise her hand in a sort of wave. He supposed it was good enough. Akane wasn't really sociable, but given that she had spent several years sealed inside of him, that was only natural. Fu soon disappeared. Naruto and Akane wandered through the forest. There were many tall trees, and the branches interwoven above their heads and covered in thick leaves blocked out a good deal of sunlight. The pair walked past shrubs sticking out of the ground and stepped over thick roots. The hoots, howls, and croaks of various animals accompanied them on their travels. "Are we going back to Konoha?" asked Akane. "Yeah," Naruto said softly. "We've been gone for a long time, and I need to inform Tsunade about what happened to Uro-sennin." A sharp pain stabbed Naruto in the chest as he thought about what had happened to his sensei. He hadn't seen Jiraiya die, but the man had been sucked into that giant satellite thing Pain had created. There was very little chance that his sensei had survived. Akane reached out and grabbed Naruto's hand. Her hand was soft and warm, delicate like a princess's. He looked at her hand, and then up at her, but Akane had turned her head. "I can't do much for you, but I can do this much at least," Akane muttered. Naruto tightened his grip on her hand and smiled. "Thank you." "Whatever," Akane mumbled as they continued traveling through the forest. Zox, despite sitting at her desk in the Hokage's office, Tsunade was barely getting any work done. Several days ago, while she was reading over documents and filing reports, her favorite jar of sake had cracked. There had been no discernible reason for it. The jar was in mint condition and incredibly durable. Despite this, a large crack was now running through it. Being as superstitious as she was, Tsunade could not help but think it was an ill omen. Ever since then, Tsunade's concentration had been shot. She misfiled reports, stamped her signature on the wrong part of documents sent her way, and created a multitude of problems for Shizune. The poor aide had been forced to clean up the numerous mistakes that she had made. Even now, Shizune was working tirelessly by her side to keep Tsunade on track. The medical ninja handed her files, watched as she signed them, and made sure she didn't sign them in the wrong spot again. While it was arduous for both of them, a fortunate lull arrived in the workload. "I feel like I have more work than ever before," Tsunade mumbled as she stretched her arms above her head. Her joints cracked. Wincing, she wondered if these cracks, if this feeling of tiredness, could be chalked up to sitting behind a desk for so long. Surely her age wasn't catching up to her. Right? "That's because you keep making mistakes in your work and having to redo it," Shizune countered. "I guess." As she brought her arms back down, Tsunade's attention was pulled to a photograph that she had placed on her desk. It was a picture from her Junon days. In it, she was giving the victory sign to the camera and smiling a big smile. Meanwhile, Jiraiya was pouting as he glared at Orochimaru, who wore a small smile. Behind them all was Sarutobi, their sensei and the Sandaime Hokage, who had placed a hand on Jiraiya's head. That was probably a reason he was pouting. "It's been a while since I've seen that photo," Shizune commented. Tsunade wore a small smile as she looked at it. "I decided to bring it out while Naruto and Jiraiya were on their mission. Looking at it is calming." Her eyes softened. "We were all so young and innocent back then. Orochimaru was just a quiet and kind boy, Jiraiya was an obnoxious brat, and I was the princess of the Senju clan. We had no idea what life had in store for us," she sighed. Thinking about the past was both pleasant and depressing. The times she shared with her teammates back then had probably been the happiest and most peaceful of her life. Everything after that was filled with death, despair, and a never-ending spiral of bad luck. It made Tsunade wonder where she'd gone wrong. Before Shizune could respond to her words, the loud thudding of footsteps drawing near made them turn toward the door just as a Jonin burst in. "I hope you have a reason for barging in here without knocking," Tsunade muttered. It's Naruto," the Jonin shouted. "He's returned to the village." "What?" Tsunade stood up from her seat and placed her hands on the desk as she leaned over. "Where is he?" "Our guard spotted him just outside of Konoha," the Jonin said. "He's arriving with a strange woman." "A strange woman?" Shizune mumbled as she looked at Tsunade. Furrowing her brow, Tsunade frowned at the Jonin. "Any idea on who this strange woman is?" "What about Jiraiya?" The Jonin hesitated. "I didn't see Jiraiya with him, but the woman is. Well, it might be better if you saw her for yourself." Tsunade couldn't help but feel an odd sense of apprehension at the news that Jiraiya was not with Naruto. However, she pushed aside her feelings for now. She couldn't afford to jump to any conclusions. "How far out is he?" she asked. "He should be arriving in the village any minute, if he hasn't already," the Jonin answered. "Very well." Tsunade took a deep breath and lowered herself into her chair. She steadied herself as she gave the Jonin a look. "Send him to me the moment he arrives in the village." "Yes, Lord Hokage." As the Jonin saluted and left within a Shunshin no Jutsu, Tsunade leaned backward and closed her eyes. Now that the Jonin was gone, her worries were getting the better of her, causing her stomach to squirm as she wondered about the knowledge that Jiraiya was not with Naruto. Had something happened to him? "Tsunade," Shizune mumbled. "There's no sense worrying about anything yet," Tsunade said. She opened her eyes and gave her aide a smile. "We just have to wait for Naruto to arrive and explain the situation to us." "Right," Shizune said with an uncertain smile of her own. Naruto arrived about 15 minutes later, entering through the door with a silent sombrity that was unusual for him. He didn't greet her with the usual, "Sup, Granny?" That had become so commonplace. In fact, he didn't say anything at all. His clothing was different than when he left the village on his mission. Instead of the mostly orange and black clothes, he wore red pants, a black shirt, and a white scarf around his neck. The only thing about his ensemble that hadn't changed was the headband around his head. Beside Naruto was a red-haired woman with an impressive and statuesque figure. Despite her rather ordinary outfit, or maybe even because of it, her fiery red hair, crimson gaze, and beautiful features stood out. Even Tsunade, who was quite confident in her appearance, felt somehow threatened by this woman's unnatural beauty. "Naruto," Tsunade said, though she didn't say anything else. She didn't even know where to start. "I've returned from my mission," Naruto said in a soft voice. "I'm sorry it took so long." At the word mission, Tsunade mustered her strength and prepared herself. I'm guessing things didn't go as planned? Naruto's smile lacked mirth. Do missions ever go as planned? You bring up a good point. Tsunade paused. She hesitated again, not wanting to ask this question, but also understanding that this was a question she needed to ask. Where's Jiraiya? He's dead, Naruto murmured, and that was all it took for him to launch into a thorough briefing of what had transpired while he and Jiraiya had been infiltrating Amida Core. He told her about how they had snuck in, how he'd been found by Konan, how Jiraiya had battled Pain, how they had fought side by side, and how Pain had used some strange technique to create sphere that had trapped Jiraiya. He left nothing out. Tsunade would have liked to say that she listened to him attentively. However, that would have been a lie. From the moment Naruto mentioned Jiraiya was dead, her mind had collapsed in on itself. She felt like this was some cosmic prank. It had to be a joke. But it wasn't a joke. The more she listened to Naruto speak, the more she realized that he was being completely serious, that he was telling the truth. Jiraiya was dead. She didn't let her emotions show while Naruto briefed her. Carefully bottling them up, she presented the stern image of the Hokage, unyielding and strong. Tsunade needed to get through this briefing before she could let herself feel anything. I understand the situation now, Tsunade said with a sigh as Naruto's briefing finally wound to a close. It sounds like you did everything you could. I should have done more. Tsunade would have normally chided Naruto for his words, but she honestly couldn't, partly because she agreed with him and partly because she felt guilty for agreeing with him. She shelved those thoughts to focus on the other matter. So, you are the QB? Tsunade looked at the redhead. Or should I call you Akane? You can call me whatever you wish, the woman said. I've gone by QB for so long that it'll probably be easier if you just call me that. Fair enough. Tsunade folded her arms on the desk and leaned forward. What is your plan now that you are free? What she really wanted to ask was if Akane planned on taking revenge on the village for sealing her. The only reason she didn't ask that question was because she didn't think this woman would do that. Not only did she not seem to care about Konoha one way or the other, but she seemed to have a rapport with Naruto. Of course, Tsunade had known about the odd relationship between these two. Naruto had spoken to her about this woman around the time they first met. This was back when Jiraiya had been hoping to convince her to become the next Hokage. That said, just from looking at them now, she could see there was a closeness that she couldn't have noticed from Naruto's words alone. They were standing close enough that the back of their hands were touching. What's more, Akane kept sending concerned glances at Naruto. That was enough to let her know that the two were bound in some way that went beyond a Baijuo and her Jinchuriki former Jinchuriki. I plan on staying with Naruto, Akane said. Like me, Naruto is immortal. The life of an immortal is lonely. However. Here, the redhead paused, tilting her head. She seemed to be thinking about something. However. I believe that life will be much more bearable if you have someone to share it with. The words themselves were innocuous enough, but Tsunade sensed something deeper behind them. She imaged that, being an unaging being who had lived for a long time, the woman before her likely had a very lonely existence. Even Tsunade did not like to be alone. That was why she had taken Shizune with her when she'd left the village after Dan's death. Tsunade chose her next words carefully. In that case, I have no problem letting you stay in the village with Naruto. I can't let you become a ninja for obvious reasons, but so long as you do not cause problems, I think we can work something out. I appreciate that, Akane said with forced courtesy. Tsunade imagined the great Kyuubi was not used to extending courtesy to humans. You are dismissed, Naruto. I'm sure I'll call upon you at some point, but you should rest up for now. Naruto looked like he wanted to say something. He opened his mouth, but when no sound came out, he slowly closed it again and nodded. Lord Hokage, he mumbled, giving a respectful nod before leaving the room with Akane and Do. Once Naruto left the office, the dam that Tsunade had been holding back finally broke. It started with a painful sob that racked her entire frame. Then tears flowed down her face like waterfalls and splashed onto the desk. Lady Tsunade, Shizune shouted in worry, but Tsunade was not paying attention to her aide. You damn fool, Tsunade whispered. The sound of her sobbing was the only noise in the Hokage's office. Zox Naruto stood outside the Hokage's office with Akane, clenching his hands as he heard the sobs coming from inside. Each painful cry drove a stake further into his heart. He closed his eyes, took several deep breaths, and walked away from the door to give the grieving woman some space. Naruto? Akane asked as she caught up with him. He sent her a smile that he wasn't really feeling. Come on. Let's head home. I feel like it's been way too long since I last saw my own apartment. Akane didn't say anything, but the look on her face was telling enough. They made their way out of the Hokage's mansion and into the busy streets. Akane hid her tails. Before she had been sealed by his father, that was how she'd avoided detection for so long. It seemed shape-shifting was a specialty of hers, and unlike the transformation technique, this one did not dispel when Akane was undertaking an activity that was mentally strenuous. I didn't pay as much attention when we were heading to the Hokage's office, Akane murmured as she looked around, but it looks very different now than it did inside of the seal. Does it? Maybe it just feels like it does. Akane placed her hands behind her back as they walked. When I was in the seal, I couldn't feel anything. I only saw what was happening through your eyes. Every sensation except sight was muted. Now that I'm finally free from that seal, I can feel the wind on my face, smell the scents from various food stalls, and hear the sounds of people talking. They had been walking down one of the more traffic-heavy streets. Numerous people were wandering around. This particular street had a lot of vendors as well, so there were quite a few food stalls along with stands that sold jewelry, produce, and various trinkets. Reaching the end of the road, they turned into a more residential district. There wasn't as much traffic since it was early afternoon. Where before the buildings were all single-story and featured large windows to display whatever was being sold, the buildings on this road were 2 or 3 stories. While they had windows, all of them were smaller and most had blinds. Stairways guarded by metal rails led up to the 2nd and 3rd floors. I've never really noticed it before, or maybe it's something I forgot after a time, but being able to enjoy these sensations is why I decided to create a human form in the first place. Is it? Yes. Akane smiled. Being a giant fox with 9 tails means I can't enjoy this kind of life. I wanted to experience what it felt like to be human. Naruto gave her a non-committal nod as they ascended the staircase to his apartment, the sound of their footsteps echoing along the floor. He unlocked the door and entered. Akane followed him. There was no one to greet him as he closed the door after Akane stepped inside. Of course, it wasn't like he had expected Tenten to be there. Just because they had made up didn't mean she'd always be around. She was either on another mission or at her family's shop. He'd visit her later. "Would you like something to eat?" asked Naruto as he slipped out of his sandals and walked further into the room. He wandered past the table and was about to step up to the fridge, but he was held back when a hand slowly clasped around his wrist. He looked back to stare at Akane, who kept him from moving with her firm grip. The look on her face was quite serious. He'd have called her expression stern, but the hint of worry, barely hidden beneath her calm visage, did an admirable job of making her expression seem more concerned than stern. "What's up? Not hungry? You're acting awfully normal for someone whose sensei just died," Akane said, her expression not wavering. Naruto flinched. Well, I can't say I'm not sad, but we're ninja, you know? Death is a constant companion in our line of work. It is, but that doesn't mean you can accept something like that so easily. You know it's not good to bottle up your emotions like that." Naruto flinched. "I know, but he had been about to say he couldn't afford to grieve yet, that he still needed to be strong, but Akane quickly tugged on his arm, yanking him toward her. Before Naruto could even figure out what was happening, he found himself being engulfed in warmth. It took him a moment to figure out what all these new sensations meant. He blinked. Then he realized that he was being embraced by Akane. The woman was actually a good bit taller than him, so his face was resting on her superlative bosoms as she wrapped her arms around him. "It's okay to grieve now," Akane said in a soft, gentle voice so unlike her normal mocking tone. "There's no one here but me." Perhaps Naruto had been bottling up his emotions too much. If so, then it would certainly explain why Naruto started crying without any build-up. It was as if her words had broken the dam keeping all of his emotions in check, unleashing a torrential flood of tears. Akane rubbed his back as he cried. "Do you feel better?" asked Akane as Naruto calmed down. "Yeah. Thank you. Anytime. You know, you're being awfully nice," Naruto mumbled, still resting his head on her chest. "It's kinda weird. Have I not been nice before?" asked Akane. "You have. It's just that you've been ignoring me for so long that I'm not used to it anymore. I guess that's my fault." Akane had already expressed how she'd stopped talking to him because she'd grown jealous of Koyuki for sleeping with him before her. He understood why she'd ignored him. At the same time, it didn't really change the fact that she'd been absent for about 2 years now. "It's fine." Naruto sniffled a bit as he pulled back, stepping out of the woman's arms. "Anyway, why don't we get something to eat? Is there anything you'd like me to make?" Akane raised an eyebrow. "Do you even have food available?" Naruto went over to his fridge and looked inside. He paused, staring at the basically empty fridge, which only had a few slices of cheese, some eggs, a carton of milk, and expired beef. While he couldn't see her because she was behind him now, he could feel Akane's amused gaze on his back. He turned around and rubbed the back of his head. "Why don't we go out for ramen tonight?" he suggested with a sheepish grin. "Zox, welcome to Ichiraku's." "How can I? Well, I'll be damned. It's been a while since you've come here, Naruto." "Hey, Ayame. Old man. How have you been?" Naruto greeted the owner of Ichiraku's with a grin as he and Akane slid into the stall and sat down. Tucci and Ayame were in their usual places, with Ayame standing in front of the counter as the face of the shop, while Tucci stood near the back, getting ready to fry up some noodles. The two greeted him with a smile. "We've been good," Tucci said with an enthusiastic laugh. "You know how it is. Nothing ever really changes around here." "I suppose that's good to hear," Naruto said. As he and Akane took their seats, Ayame leaned over, placing her elbows on the table and her head on her hands. She flicked her eyes over to Akane. The redhead noticed her gaze and raised an eyebrow. Ayame then looked back at Naruto, a smile growing on her face. "And who is this?" asked Ayame. "Got yourself another girlfriend?" "I suppose you could say that," Akane answered before Naruto could say anything. "However, I like to think that I'm more than just a girlfriend." "Oh ho." Ayame leaned back and gave a big smile. "It seems this girl is staking her claim. I like her." "What do you have to say to that, Naruto?" Naruto shrugged. "I'm not really sure what I can say. It's not like she's wrong." His words made Ayame clap her hands together and squeal. After ordering their meal, Naruto ordered a large bowl of beef ramen while Akane had a smaller bowl of miso ramen. They spoke with Ayame a bit more as Tucci prepared their dinner. Akane did most of the talking. Despite having been sealed inside of him for about 16 years, she seemed quite adept at communicating with others. He supposed her previous quiet disposition around food was because she'd still been adjusting to life outside of the seal. Their meals came and the two ate in silence. They left soon after finishing, though Ayame told Akane to come over sometime so they could talk more. Naruto had the distinct feeling that Ayame just wanted to talk about the redhead's relationship with him. It still wasn't very late by the time they had arrived home, and in fact, the sun was still shining overhead. Once again, there was no one home. Naruto locked the door behind them as the supernatural creature disguised as a human shed some of her disguise. Her 6 tails appeared behind her, and a pair of fox ears formed on her head. While her tails waved back and forth, the ears twitched. "It seems we still have a lot of time left today, but I'm really not sure what we should do," Naruto muttered, trying to think of what they could do. He normally trained during this time. However, he just got back from his mission and was mentally drained. He didn't feel like training. "I suppose we could go shopping. Akane is still wearing the clothes that Fu provided for her." "I can think of something we can do," Akane said. "Really? What is it, Humph?" Naruto's voice was hampered when Akane lunged forward and pressed their mouths together. His muffled grunt was cut off when she pushed her tongue into his mouth, licking the inside and stirring up saliva. He was stunned for a moment. Should he kiss back? He didn't know, and Akane pulled back before he could make a decision. Her tongue was the last thing to leave his mouth. A small string connected them until she pulled back enough to break it. "I do not care if you sleep with other women," Akane said before he could ask her what the kiss had been about. "However, I'm going to stake my claim on you. Even if you sleep with other women, none of them will be able to stay with you. They'll die while you live on. That is the difference between you and them." "Akane? I am different," Akane continued. "I will not die like they will. Unlike them, I can and will stay by your side forever. That is why even if you sleep with other women, even if you fall in love with other women, you will always be mine." As Naruto gazed into Akane's crimson eyes, he felt himself giving in to the idea, causing him to nod once. A small smile came unbidden to his face. "That doesn't sound so bad." A single tooth poked out of Akane's mouth as she grinned at him. "Not bad at all." She kissed him again, and this time, Naruto kissed her back. Their tongues became entwined, twirling around each other in a wet embrace. This sloppy exchange stirred up even more saliva between them. Neither of them cared. They continued to kiss, the lewd smacking of their lips mixing with their moans and panted breathing. At the same time, Naruto and Akane wrapped each other in their arms, pulling their bodies closer. Because she wasn't wearing a bra, Akane's nipples were rubbing against him through the fabric of her clothing, hard and pointy. The sensation was electric. Several jolts traveled across his chest as her large breasts squashed against him. Naruto pulled back from their kiss. Akane whined. However, he grabbed her hand and tugged her along, pulling her into his bedroom. I figured we should change venues, he added. That's a good idea, Akane agreed. His bedroom wasn't large, but the bed was fairly new and unused. He'd had to get a new one a while ago because he had grown. His old one had been so small that his feet hung off the edge when he slept. Now it was easily able to fit 2 or even 3 people on top. Just as he was turning around, Akane pushed him back, causing his legs to hit the bed. He plummeted backwards. He hit the bed once, bounced, and then settled down. Before he could get his bearings, Akane was on him again. She didn't just stick with kissing. A jolt traveled through him when Akane placed her hand underneath his shirt. Her smooth, soft hand traveled up and down his chest and stomach as if she was creating a map of his abs and pecs. Naruto felt a shiver race down his spine as she reached his nipple and pinched it. Akane. I'm going to do something for you that I've never done for anyone else before, Alane said as she moved back down, unzipping his pants and pulling them off. She also removed his boxers before he had the chance to tell her otherwise. Naruto would have said something, but he was forced to throw his head back and groan when Akane stroked him to hardness. Her touch was delicate. He might have even called it tentative, like she wasn't sure what to do with it. He raised his head. Akane was staring at his mask with something of a shocked expression. Akane? What's wrong? Nothing. She shook her head, and then smiled. I was just admiring this bad boy. I remember seeing it when you slept with Koyuki, but it looks a lot bigger now than it did through the seal. Oh. Naruto was at a loss for words, but part of the reason was because Akane had leaned forward and kissed the mushroom-shaped head. He clenched his toes and gritted his teeth as a new wave of pleasant sensations traveled from his cock to his brain. Huh. So it twitches to even basic stimulus like this. Akane grinned. How like a man. She leaned forward, stuck out her tongue, and dragged it along the underside of his dick. Naruto ground his teeth together as she swirled her tongue along the tip. And it has such a strong smell. I never noticed it before, but the scent of your arousal is really powerful. Or maybe yours is just a particularly strong scent. Is that bad? No. Akane took a deep breath. I actually like this smell. Naruto hadn't felt this embarrassed since his first time was taken by Koyuki, maybe not even then. He didn't have time to feel too ashamed, though, as Akane took him into her mouth. His entire body felt like it had seized up. Her mouth was warm, wet, and the feeling of her tongue swirling around him caused a pleasant sensation to rush up and down his spine. Her tongue was a bit rougher than the other girls he'd been with, but that just meant it left a stronger impression. Do you like dish? Asked Akane, her voice muffled by his dick. Ish having me shuck on your dick enjoyable? It is. Thash good. I'm gonna shuck on your dick so hard thash all of your cum shoot straight into my stomach. Despite how pleasant it felt, Akane didn't seem very skilled at the art of oral sex. She was a bit sloppy as she bobbed her head up and down. Not only that, but he was too big for her to fit all of him inside of her mouth. To rectify this problem, she had made sure to coat the lower half of his shaft with saliva and was using her hands, but it didn't change how unskilled she was. Despite this, Naruto came far more quickly than he had with anyone else. It must have been her stare. She'd been gazing at him with those burning crimson eyes the entire time she'd taken him into her mouth. It was way too sexy. Akane? I'm gonna come soon. Naruto was fortunately well versed enough in bedroom etiquette to warn Akane when he felt his balls tighten. His words only spurred Akane on more. She pulled her head back until only his head was still in her mouth, and then leaned forward, pushing her breasts together and engulfing his cock with them. Hurry up and come. Come in my mouth. This new sensation was too much for Naruto, who quickly blew his load inside of Akane's mouth. The redhead let out a muffled sound that was like a mixture of moan and surprised sputter. He must have had more stored inside of him than usual. Akane's cheeks bulged before several droplets of white, sticky fluid leaked from her mouth. She blinked several times, and despite having cum once, seeing her throat move as she swallowed his sperm made Naruto immediately hard again. You have a lot more stamina than most men, huh? Well, I'm not human. Naruto breathed deeply. I think that gives me more stamina than normal. You're also an Uzumaki. Akane stood up and removed her clothes, letting them fall to the floor. They have a surprising amount of stamina. For humans. Her breasts stood out as they sat on her chest. Because they were so large, they hung down a bit, but there was a surprising amount of perkiness to them as well. They bounced every time she moved. The light pink nipples were already hard. When Naruto looked down, He saw her lips had become wet. Several trails ran down her inner thighs. Her currently closed lips, which looked as pure and untainted as a virgin's, glistened from her own arousal. She quickly straddled Naruto's thighs, and then began rubbing his shaft along her slit. Akane moaned. Naruto tried to move, but she stopped him. "Let me do this at my own pace," she said. Naruto leaned back and let the woman do as she pleased. She continued rubbing herself against him, lubricating his already wet cock even more, and then she raised her hips and positioned herself above him. His head rubbed against her entrance. Another trickle of her love juices coated his shaft. With her hands on his chest, Akane slowly lowered herself onto him, her lips stretching as she took him in. "HNN." Akane grunted and groaned as she gritted her teeth. "You really are big. This is actually uncomfortable. Do you want to stop?" "Of course not. I've already come this far." With one final push, Akane fully sheathed Naruto inside of her. She didn't do anything. She just sat there, straddling his waist. Naruto used this moment to try and get used to the sensation of being inside of Akane. She was so much tighter than anyone else, though she was also a lot more wet. That was probably why it was more bearable. Her walls had stretched to accommodate his length and girth, but she was so tight that it was difficult not to come just from being inside of her. Ha! Ha! Akane took several deep breaths, causing her chest to jiggle. A trickle of sweat ran down her left breast, tracing a path over her pointed nipple, and dripping onto her stomach. She centered herself and nodded. "Okay. I think I'm ready." "Okay then. I'll let you take the lead." Naruto placed his hands on Akane's hips as she lifted herself up. Centimeter after centimeter of his dick, coated in Akane's sexual secretions, became visible, until just his head was still inside of her. Naruto could see how her lips stretched around him. It was so erotic that he needed to take a shaky breath to avoid losing control of himself. She waited, and then lowered herself again. Repeating this process several times, Akane soon adjusted to the feeling of him being inside of her. Then she increased her pace. The sound of her lips sucking him in reminded him, oddly enough, of slurping. Joining it was the loud smacking noise as her butt met his thighs. It wasn't long before she was bouncing up and down, riding him. Why does this feel so good?" she questioned as she moved her hips. Her breathing was hot and heavy as she took several gulps of air. "I don't understand how something like this can feel so amazing. Don't ask me. I wasn't." It was rhetorical. Akane stuck her tongue out at Naruto in a surprisingly childish gesture, but he used that opportunity to lean up and claim her tongue for his own. She released a surprised squeal as he sucked on her tongue. However, she quickly kissed back, attacking his mouth so voraciously he wondered if she was trying to conquer him. Slurp. Their exchange was even sloppier than before. Drool trailed down their mouths, but neither of them paid attention as their saliva dripped onto their chest, which mixed in with the sweat coating their skin. Naruto grabbed Akane's fleshy ass cheeks and squeezed them. His fingers sank into her butt. He'd never felt something so soft before. Akane moaned against as she rocked her hips. Loud, wet sucking sounds echoed around the room, mixing with the slapping sound of their hips meeting. "This is so good. It's so good I feel like I'm losing my mind." Akane was surprisingly vocal during sex. Naruto was surprised, but he didn't let it show. As she was screaming, he leaned down and took one of her nipples into his mouth, swirling his tongue around it before gently biting down. He placed one hand on the bed, but he reached out with the other and fondled her other breast, his fingers sinking into the soft flesh as if they were marshmallows. HNNGGG. His actions caused Akane to lose her ability to speak. She wrapped her arms around his head as he thrust his hips up, causing her soft body to shake and jiggle. Her tits soon became coated in his saliva as he sucked and licked them. "Akane, I'm about to blow my load again." "And me too. I'm about to come." "Then. Together?" "Together." Naruto could no longer focus on her breasts as he continued thrusting his hips into Akane, who could no longer move her own hips and simply clung onto him. He gritted his teeth. His balls were tightening again. Meanwhile, Akane's squishy insides had become unbearably tight. Just moving around was difficult. "Naruto. I can't hold on. I'm coming. I'm coming. Oh. Oh." Akane's entire body spasmed as she came. The feeling of her warm fluids rushing around him was all the stimulus Naruto needed to release his own load. His head was smashed into her breast as she clung to him. Several seconds of absolute bliss passed before, with surprising suddenness, Akane's arms and legs went slack. She would have fallen over, but Naruto wrapped an arm around her to keep her there, resting against his body. He took several deep breaths. The scent of Akane's sweat was surprisingly sweet, or maybe he was just a perv who liked the scent of sweating women. Mixing with the scent was the distinct smell of sex. "Naruto?" Akane asked as her chest and shoulders heaved. "Yeah? I want to go again." Naruto would have snorted at her demanding voice, but he was of the same opinion. "Alright, but I want to be on top this time." "Not a chance. Meanie. I'm bored," Kotetsu complained as he sat beside a knee-high table, legs crossed as he leaned forward. Izumo sighed. "Do you really have to keep saying that?" "I can't help it. There's nothing to do." "You're not the only one who thinks that way, you know. We're all the way out here in the boonies. The nearest village is over an hour away, and that's if we run. However, we have a duty to perform here. Regardless of how boring it is, we can't neglect this mission because of something like boredom. You should learn to be more responsible." Kotetsu and Izumo were on a mission near the outskirts of Hai no Kuni on the border next to Ado no Kuni and Yuno Kuni. Even though it was called a mission, it was really just border patrol. They, along with 2 other chunins and 2 jonins making for a total of 6, were charged with guarding and patrolling the border between these 2 nations and their own. It was a thankless, boring job. "I wish we had something to do," Kotetsu moaned as he placed his hands on the floor and leaned back. "Quit complaining. We're all bored out of our minds," grunted the jonin in command of him and Izumo. He was a serious man named Tatsuo. With his square face that looked to be carved from stone, tall stature, strong build, and scarred visage, he could probably give Ibiki Morino a run for his money. "The least they could do is let us spruce this place up," Kotetsu kept moaning as he glanced at his drab surroundings. The building they were located in could scarcely be called a base. It was a single-story building buried in the ground. It was meant to blend in with the surrounding forest. While the outside was built in the shape of a boulder and had vines and moss growing on it, the inside was a very plain one-room building. The floor, walls, and ceiling were all the same drab gray color. There was no television, no bookshelf, no nothing. All they had was a table for meals, a fridge where their food was stored, a kitchen to make food in, and a workstation where the 2 jonin wrote reports. There was also a bird cage with several birds. That was it. There was literally nothing else. "This isn't your personal den, you miscreant," Tatsuo snapped. "This base was made solely for the purpose of watching our borders. We only need to focus on our jobs, keeping an eye on our neighbors in case they try something funny." "I know that," Kotetsu grumbled. "If you know that, then stop complaining." As Tatsuo went on grumbling about how he wished he had more competent teammates, Kotetsu thought about giving the man a retort, but he decided not to. There was no sense in antagonizing his team leader. Well, there was no sense in angering him any more than he already had. Heaving a big breath, he stood up and wandered over to the fridge, opened in, and took out a water bottle. As he guzzled down the water, Izumo wandered up to him. "Hey, man. Could you lay off the complaining?" his partner in crime asked. "I don't like being stuck here any more than you do, but we are still on a mission. Complaining isn't going to make our situation any better, you know?" "I know," Kotetsu sighed as he pulled the bottle from his mouth. "I just can't help him. Every day it's the same thing, we wander around the border for several hours, and then come back here and do nothing for several more hours. We've been here for nearly a month and nothing has happened. At this point, I almost wish someone would attack us just so I don't have to feel this intense boredom." "You shouldn't say something like that," Izumo muttered. "I think we've already had enough troubles to deal with, what with Akatsuki and all that." "I suppose." Kotetsu took another chug from his water bottle. As he was drinking, Tatsuo paced back and forth across the floor, his arms crossed and a fierce scowl on his face. "Intetsu and the others are late," the jonin grumbled. "It shouldn't take this long to return from patrol." "Maybe they ran into some trouble," Izumo offered. Tatsuo frowned at him. "Let us hope not." About an hour later, the 3 of them were forced out of their thoughts when the door to their base burst open. Kotetsu received the shock of his life when Kiala, a woman with brown hair and eyes, stumbled through the entrance and fell to the floor in a crumpled heap. The sound of her striking the ground produced a surprisingly wet sound. He realized, belatedly, that it was because her body was covered in wounds. Her chunin flak jacket was torn, cuts and gashes ran along her body, and the blood leaking from those wounds soon formed a puddle underneath her. "Kiala," Tatsuo shouted as he rushed over to the woman. He knelt down and turned Kiala over as Kotetsu and Izumo jolted into action and began grabbing medical supplies. While they were doing that, Tatsuo tried to speak with the women, whose labored breathing mixed with pained rasps. "Kiala, what happened out there?" "Kekumo." Kiala coughed, blood spewing from her mouth and down her front. We were attacked by Kumo Shinobi. The words caused everyone present to freeze like they'd been struck by an ice jutsu. Tatsuo was the one who recovered first. That's impossible. We're allied with Kumo, aren't we? No one answered his question. It wasn't like Kotetsu and Izumo knew the answer, and Kiala was already so weak it didn't look like she could talk anymore. She'd probably used all the strength she had left to run all this way and let them know what was happening. Kotetsu, help me patch up her injuries, Tatsuo ordered. Izumo, send a message to the Hokage. Tell her what's happening here. Sir. Kotetsu and Izumo shouted as they got to work. Kneeling next to Tatsuo and Kiala, Kotetsu opened a medical kit containing numerous supplies. There were anesthetics, disinfectant, bandages, soldier pills, blood replenishing pills, and even a sewing needle and some thread for stitching up injuries. The first step toward healing someone is stemming the flow of blood. However, there were far too many wounds for that, so Kotetsu mashed up some blood replenishing pills into something Kiala could drink. After all, it didn't look like she had the strength to chew. Meanwhile, Tatsuo used disinfectant to clean her wounds, then anesthetized her before using a basic fire jutsu to cauterize the cuts they could see. It looks like there are even more injuries than I can see like this, Tatsuo muttered. We're going to have to strip her. He paused and cocked his head. Kotetsu wondered what he was doing, but then he also paused in mashing the blood replenishing pills. He didn't realize what was wrong at first, but then Tatsuo said, all the animals have stopped making noise. Izumo, who looked like he had finished sending the message off with a messenger bird, also stopped what he was doing. The fact that the animals were no longer making noise was an obvious cause for concern. Generally, there were always animals creating background music that they could hear even from inside the space. Birds would sing, frogs would ribbit, and crickets would chirp. The only time animals went quiet was when they sensed danger. That could only mean one thing. Kotetsu grabbed two large kunai blades bandaged to his back. Although they were called kunai blades, they weren't really kunai. Each blade was nearly half a meter in length. The reason it was called a kunai blade was because it vaguely resembled one and even had a ring at the end of the hilt like a kunai. However, these blades were curved, elongated, and had only a single edge, making both its appearance and function closer to that of a sword. He handed one of the swords to Izumo, who took it and moved so they were standing back to back. Tatsuo set Kiala back on the ground and stood protectively over her. Not a sound could be heard outside. Kotetsu strained his ears to listen, but he could hear nothing except for the insanely fast beating of his own heart. It was a good thing he had Izumo with him. Had he not been with his partner, this sort of tension would have made him panic. What do you think, Tatsuo? Asked Kotetsu when nothing happened after several minutes. Should we go outside and scout the area? Reconnaissance? Wearing a frown on his face, Tatsuo opened his mouth to answer. He would never get the chance. The ceiling exploded the very next moment, and a large panther, black and crackling with energy, charged into the base. Kotetsu and Izumo tensed as the creature released a soundless scream. Arcs of black lightning shot from its body and flew toward them and Tatsuo, but the Jonin in their group reacted quickly. Doten, Doryuki, Earth Release, Mud Wall. Tatsuo slammed his hands on the ground and a wall rose up before them. However, the black lightning followed the same principles as regular lightning. It was strong against earth. The lightning blasted right through the wall. Fortunately, Kotetsu and Izumo were able to leap out of the way. Even Tatsuo was quick enough to grab Kiala and jump away before they could be struck. As their Jonin leader set Kiala against the wall, Kotetsu and Izumo went through a series of hand seals. Katen, Gokyaku no Jutsu. The two unleashed a simultaneous fireball jutsu that slammed into the Black Panther made of lightning. While lightning wasn't weak against fire, fire could still overpower lightning, and a collaboration jutsu like this was several times stronger than the Black Panther. It was a good thing the ceiling had been destroyed, or all of the hot air and wind pressure from the explosion would have had nowhere to go. Kotetsu and Izumo covered their faces as the intense blast of scorching winds pushed against them before dissipating. When the attack died down, the Black Panther was gone, and all that remained was crater. However, they couldn't rest just yet. A man had appeared before them. He was fairly tall, possessed dark skin, and a slightly bulbous nose. His black eyes retained a bored look, though Kotetsu also thought he saw reluctance in his gaze. He had shaggy white hair that covered his left eye, and he was wearing the traditional garb of a Kumagakure shinobi. On top of that, the characters for water and lightning were tattooed on his right and left shoulders respectively. I expected that last attack to kill you, the man mumbled with a sigh. I really don't want to fight against anyone. You're Drew, Izumo stated. You're a Jonin from Kumagakure, known for possessing the Ranten Kekkei Genkai. You've heard of me? Daru said with faint surprise. Well, that's all. What are you doing here? Tatsuo asked as he pulled a pair of kunai from his ninja pouch. Has Kumagakure decided to betray Konoha? Daru sighed. I suppose you could say that. Don't get me wrong, I think betraying Konoha is a stupid idea, especially when our alliance was going so well. But, well, our Hokage has given us his orders. As fellow shinobi, I'm sure you understand what that means. A shinobi's duty was to loyally follow the orders of his or her Hokage. Going against Hokage's orders was the same as going against the village. Kotetsu, Izumo, and Tatsuo understood this all too well, just as they understood that if the Hokage ordered them to attack Kumagakure, they would have no choice but to obey or become missing ninja. We might understand why you are doing this, but don't expect any forgiveness from us, Kotetsu declared. Daru's smile was resigned. Don't worry. I won't. Before a standoff could take place, Kotetsu and Izumo rushed forward, while Tatsuo provided support by throwing several kunai. Daru grabbed the massive cleaver sword on his back and pulled it off. The broadsword was fairly long and had 3 hinges running along the blade. Kotetsu attacked from the front as Izumo moved behind Daru. His sword clashed against the massive cleaver. As sparks flew, he immediately knew he wouldn't be able to win in a battle of strength. Not only was Daru not budging, but he didn't even look like he was trying. Fortunately, he wasn't fighting this guy alone. Izumo tried to impale Daru from behind, having slipped around the man while he was engaging Kotetsu, but their opponent must have already predicted this. Daru grabbed the flat part of his sword. Now with both hands on the blade, he shoved Kotetsu back, spun around, and knocked Izumo's blade aside. Then, as Izumo stumbled forward, the man gripped the handle with both hands, channeled lightning chakra through it, and swung. His blade carved straight through Izumo, or so it seemed until a log appeared in the Chunin's place. Kaden, Gokaku no Jutsu. While Izumo and Kotetsu engaged Daru, Tatsuo went through a series of hand seals, sucked in a lungful of air, and released a massive burst of flame. He must have used a lot of chakra. The technique was even bigger than the one Kotetsu and Izumo had created with their combined attack. Perhaps sensing that he couldn't overpower this one, Daru leapt into the air and avoided the jutsu. The fireball struck the wall and destroyed what was left of their base. Kotetsu, Izumo, and Tatsuo with Kiala in his arms, were also forced to leap out of the base and into the trees. The two forces were now standing on the branches. Several meters of distance separated them. Daru had put his cleaver onto his back again, but neither Kotetsu nor Izumo made a move. This man was a Jonin like Tatsuo. A simple attack wouldn't be enough to take him down. What should we do, leader? Asked Kotetsu as he glared at their enemy. His answer did not come in the form of words, but in a scream instead. He and Izumo looked back. Their eyes bulged as they looked at the 4 long, nail-like objects protruded from their Jonin leader's chest. Tatsuo dropped Kiala, who fell to the ground with a sharp crack, and then the nails were pulled from his back. He tottered forward, and then fell from the branch as well, striking the ground head first. The person who had appeared behind Tatsuo was also familiar to Kotetsu. This young woman, whose blonde hair was long, straight, and bound taut with bandages, had lived in Konoha for quite some time. It was Yugito Ni. However, something seemed wrong. The young woman who would so often converse with them at the front gate when she went on a mission no longer possessed the smile she'd become known for. Her eyes were dead. They were emotionless enough that Kotetsu felt a chill run down his spine. There's no way. Yugito. Why? Asked Kotetsu. She said nothing. Ranten, Reiza Sakasu, Storm Release, Laser Circus. Several beams shot from Daru, who had used their shock to chain several hand seals together. Kotetsu couldn't count the number of beams being blasted at him and Izumo. It was bright enough that he almost felt blinded. Even though he was shocked, his body quickly moved with the unconscious thought of instinct. However, as he and Izumo leapt off the branch, the beams curved, altering their course to follow them. A scream erupted from Kotetsu as several beams struck him in the chest. The attack was so powerful that each beam easily tore through his body. It felt like his insides were being burned. As he fell to the ground, Kotetsu tried to fight against the darkness crowding around his vision. He blinked once. Someone was standing above him, a blonde-haired beauty surrounded by blue flames. His vision dimmed. Then Yugito Ni slashed down with her claws and gouged out his throat. Daru dropped to the forest floor, landing in a crouch. He looked over at Izumo. The Chunin was lying against a tree, having somehow managed to lean on it before dying. his head lowered and sightless eyes staring at the ground. Next he glanced over to Tatsuo and Kiala. Both of them were obviously dead. Tatsuo had been impaled through the heart by Yugito's claws. The woman had already been knocking on death's door, but the impact when she struck the ground had killed her. Then he looked at Kotetsu. Not only was his body full of holes from Daru's own jutsu, but his throat had been slashed open by Yugito. The young woman in question was cleaning her claws off, her expression nonchalant. It was disquieting. While Yugito didn't act any differently than she normally did, the fact that she could kill these Konoha shinobi so easily disturbed him for multiple reasons. "Hey, Yugito," he grabbed the woman's attention. "Do you know why the Raikage suddenly decided to go to war with Konoha?" Yugito shook her head. "I don't, but does it really matter? We're shinobi. Our only job is to follow the orders of our Raikage. We don't need to worry about the hows and whys." That was a very Yugito response, but at the same time, he sensed some dissonance to her words. It was like the words she was speaking didn't match her own feelings on the matter. "Well, I suppose there's nothing we can do now." Daru looked at the corpses lying on the ground. "We're already committed to this stall course of action." "Right, so now that the way is clear, let's get back to the main army," Yugito said, turning around and beginning their walk back toward their forces, which were waiting inside Oto no Kuni. As Daru wondered why Oto hadn't attacked them for using their nation to gain a foothold in Konoha, he didn't miss the tears leaking from Yugito's eyes, though the woman herself seemed to have not noticed. An emergency meeting had been called by the Hokage. Since it was a meeting meant for everyone of Chunin rank and above, it was not taking place in the Hokage's office, which was much too small. Another venue had been set up. The large space was easily able to contain several thousand people. Naruto was standing beside Kakashi and Sakura, who he'd spotted upon entering. There were so many people that he was probably lucky to have found even them. It was honestly thanks to their hair. Kakashi's spiky silver hair was easily recognizable, as was Sakura's mop of bright pink. "I don't suppose either of you know what this is about," Naruto said. Kakashi shook his head as he flipped a page of his book, Icha Make Out, while Sakura crossed her arms and said, "I don't have a clue, but I imagine it's something serious, given how every ninja in Konoha above Jinan rank has been summoned." Naruto had been hoping Sakura would know something. She was Tsunade's apprentice, so he figured she might have some inside knowledge, but he guessed things didn't work out like that. She primarily worked at the hospital when she wasn't on missions. It was unlikely she'd have close contact with Tsunade these days. "Kakashi, my youthful rival." An exuberant shout suddenly made everyone except Kakashi look up as Guy broke through the crowd to stand before them. "This is a most unexpected meeting, isn't it? Why, young Lee and I were just returning from a mission when we suddenly got the call to come here. Do you have any idea what's going on?" "No," Kakashi said in a bored voice as Rock Lee, Neji, and Tenten wandered up to them. "I'm afraid I don't know either." "That's too bad," Guy said, though he didn't appear that disappointed. "Tenten," Naruto greeted. "Hey." Tenten smiled at him. "I see you're back from your mission. How was? What's wrong?" she asked when Naruto grimaced. "I'll tell you later," Naruto said as Tsunade finally appeared before them. She stood on a stage elevated several dozen centimeters above the ground floor, allowing her to be seen even in the far back. Naruto, who stood near the front, could see her more clearly than the others. While the woman projected an aura of strength and confidence, the bags under her eyes spoke of exhaustion. He imagined she hadn't been sleeping well since Naruto had returned with news of Jiraiya's death. "We have a grave situation on our hands," Tsunade said without preamble. As always, Shizune stood by the Hokage's side. "We just received a report from our border patrol along Oto no Kuni and Unokuni that several Kumagakure ninja attacked the border patrol's base. Furthermore, we received another report that Takigakure was attacked by shinobi from Iwagakure. While they were able to successfully fend them off, the Takigakure village leader sent a report claiming an army of several thousand Iwa shinobi passed through the border toward Hinokuni." A wave of unease swept through the crowd. Naruto strained his ears as everyone began muttering amongst each other, though it was too jumbled for him to hear individual conversations. By this point, Kakashi had closed his book, put it in his pouch, and was staring at the Hokage with a serious look. "Do we know if Kumo has gathered an army similar to Iwa?" he asked. "We do not know that." Tsunade shook her head. "However, we believe it's safe to assume they have. That said, right now we do not have enough information to make any decisions." "But it was confirmed that Kumo attacked and annihilated one of our border patrols, correct?" asked Neji. "Correct," Tsunade confirmed. "Of that there is no doubt." More murmurs swept through the crowd. Meanwhile, A cold chill swept through Naruto. "This doesn't make any sense," he mumbled. "What?" asked Tenten. Ignoring her for the moment, Naruto stepped forward. "Lady Hokage, doesn't this seem strange? While our hostilities with Iwa have always been present, we've made great inroads in our alliance with Kumo. Why would they attack us now?" Tsunade hesitated to answer, which made Neji step forward. "Perhaps they are finally showing their true colors. Kumo has always been a greedy nation that has coveted the many Kekkei Genkai Konoha possesses, including the Byakugan. My own father was a victim of their schemes. Maybe their alliance was just that, a scheme to make us drop our guard." Naruto shook his head. "That's what doesn't make sense. If it was a scheme to make us drop our guard so they could kidnap Kekkei Genkai users, they wouldn't have launched an attack on our borders. They would have used the alliance to sneak a few ninja in, quietly kidnapped our shinobi, and then left before we could do anything. Their actions here are counterproductive." Neji looked like he wanted to argue, but he paused and furrowed his brow as though seeing Naruto's point. It was true. Now that Konoha was aware of what happened here, stealing Kekkei Genkai users was going to be much harder. That meant their purpose was something else. "You bring up a good point," Neji said at last. "I retract my earlier statement. What they are doing right now doesn't make much sense. Whatever the case may be," Tsunade began again before anyone else could speak, "the fact remains that we do not have enough information about the current situation to make any informed decisions. I will be putting all of our forces on a state of high alert. Furthermore, several of your squads will be receiving orders to do reconnaissance. We also need to deal with Iwa. According to Shibuki of Takigakuer, Iwa's forces number several thousands. However, I suspect those are only the forces he was able to see. Iwa is also bordered by Kusa no Kuni and Ame no Kuni." Tsunade paused to allow this knowledge to sink in. Naruto glanced at his fellow shinobi's faces as they, like him, realized how serious the situation had become. "I'll be giving all of you your orders at some point, so remain on standby and await further instructions," Tsunade finished. While everyone responded with a resounding yes, "Lady Hokage." Naruto could not help but notice how unsettled the words sounded. Iwa was bringing an army into their country, and Kumo attacked their border and may also have an army on the way. He didn't say anything, but it looked like this was the beginning of another shinobi war, though he sincerely hoped that wasn't the case. Zox Naruto stood in front of the kitchen counter, kneading dough with his knuckles to make it stretch out. Once stretched and long, he twisted the dough up, grabbed both ends, began stretching it even more, and then lifted the dough and slapped it against the counter like someone playing jump rope before twirling it all around and repeating the process. He was making ramen with homemade noodles. Old man Tucci had taught him how to do this. By twirling and twisting the dough, he could exponentially enhance its elasticity. The dough spun, slapped against the counter, and twirled around until it looked like two snakes entwined around each other. Once it was ready, he set it all on the counter and began cutting it. While he was doing that, Tenten and Akane were sitting together at the kitchen table, quietly conversing about something. Naruto didn't know what they were talking about. He'd only introduced them a few minutes before stepping into the kitchen, but at least they weren't killing each other. That was a good start. Tenten had been pretty surprised to find out that not only was the Kyuubi not inside of him anymore, but that the smoking hot redhead was, in fact, the creature who had nearly destroyed Konoha when Naruto was first born. It had taken the girl a good 5 minutes to pick her jaw up off the floor. Immediately after she had, however, Naruto found himself bombarded with questions. He'd done his best to answer them, but he was nearly overwhelmed by the sheer number and speed they came at him. Akane had been kind enough to field the questions for him. Once he finished cutting all the dough into several long strands, it was time to pull. Basically, he rolled them in some flour, and then began stretching it into what would become multiple noodles. One noodle became 2, 4, 8, and so on. He did this with each strand, making exactly 128 noodles with each. After which he cooked them. He had to get pretty creative for the cooking part. Naruto didn't have an oil fryer like the old man did, so instead he used a pot, creating each batch of noodles separately. He put the finished noodles in a bowl, which he served up with miso, added some greens, some chopped up uzumaki, and whatever vegetables he had on hand. Now with 3 bowls of homemade ramen in hand, Naruto wandered over to the table. The two women immediately became silent when he approached, causing him to frown. "I don't know what you two are talking about, but don't stop on my account," Naruto said as he set a bowl in front of them each. The chopsticks were already on the table. "Please keep talking. You know what they say, sharing is caring." "Sorry, Naruto, but women need their secrets," Akane said with a smile. Well, I'm pretty sure those secrets were about me, he returned with a smile of his own. Or were those furtive glances you kept stealing while you thought I wasn't looking something you do to everyone you meet? Obviously, it's something I do to everyone I meet. Akane sniffed. You just happen to be the only person I have the pleasure of seeing every day. Please stop, you too. Tenten moaned as she broke her chopsticks. That back and forth you're doing is going to annoy me. What's wrong with it? Asked Naruto as he swirled noodles around with his chopsticks. Akane had already taken her first bite. He felt his chest swell when her eyes lit up and she took a second. Everything, Tenten murmured. First, it makes you two sound like an old married couple. She slurped up some noodles, paused, and then finished swallowing. These are good. Thanks, Naruto responded in a cheery tone. Now, you were saying? Right. Twirling the chopsticks in her hand, Tenten continued. Second, I feel completely left out when you do that. Fair point, Naruto admitted. What's the third point? Asked Akane. There isn't one, Tenten said. Just those two. Naruto and Akane ate their food and pondered those words for a moment before deciding to just accept them. Everyone was hungry anyway. He had to admit that while his noodles weren't the best, they were still quite delicious. They were firm and soaked up the flavor from the broth quite well. Certainly, they were nowhere near Old Man Tucci's ramen. However, Naruto also hadn't been making ramen for 50+ years. For someone who only started recently, his stuff wasn't bad. For your information, I was informing Akane of everything that Lady Tsunade told us, Tenten replied. And what do you think? Asked Naruto. Akane paused with the chopsticks halfway to her lips. She flicked her eyes back and forth between the two of them, then sighed and said, Do I need to have an opinion about such an inane matter? Before she finished bringing the ramen to her mouth. Well, I suppose you don't have to, he admitted. But you have a lot of experience with matters like this, right? I'm sure you've seen countless wars. I have, Akane admitted. And I suspect this one will be no different from all the others I've seen. But don't you think it's strange? Asked Tenten. Konoha and Kumo are supposed to be allies now. It's odd that they would attack us when our relationship had finally become so stable. Not really. Akane shrugged. You humans are always stabbing each other in the back for the most inane reasons. Power. Land. Resources. The ability to dominate and subjugate those weaker than yourself. Humans have and always will desire these things. It is an inescapable truth that I accepted a long time ago. Akane's words really had a way of killing the mood. They were filled with a cynicism that neither of the two admittedly bright-eyed shinobi had. Even Naruto, who had experienced some pretty horrible things in his life, if he did say so himself, could not fathom her words. Well, I think it's strange, Tenten muttered. Dinner was ate mostly in silence after that, and when they were done, Naruto took the dishes into the kitchen and created a shadow clone to clean them. He spoke with Tenten some more while his clone loudly complained. However, Tenten needed to get a good night's rest in since there was no telling what tomorrow would bring. Chances were good they would all need to sleep, so they were prepared for whatever missions Tsunade decided to send them on tomorrow. That night, Naruto was dressed in boxers and nothing else. Akane, perhaps still unused to sleeping in actual clothes, had gone nude. She lay against him, holding him close as though he were a pillow. Her eyes were closed, her breathing was even, and it looked like she had fallen asleep. He knew better. Can't sleep? She asked. He shook his head. I'm worried about Yugito. Akane stirred slightly, but it was only so she could caress his bare chest. The Jinchuriki of the Nibi. If I'm not mistaken, she is a Kumagakure shinobi, yes? And they are the people who launched a surprise attack on Konoha? That's right. Them and Iwagakure. I don't know that one, Akane admitted. But you are concerned about whether or not you'll have to fight her? Not just that. Thinking for a moment, Naruto allowed his eyes to trail a crack on his ceiling. It went all the way to the wall before disappearing. My biggest concern is that something has happened to her. I honestly can't see Yugito agreeing to fight against us. I mean, she spent so much time here, and she and I became so close. Would she really be willing to fight us? Hard to say, but she is a shinobi, so I'm sure she will loyally obey her ninja village even if it means betraying someone she cares about. Isn't that what it means to be a ninja? While Akane's words were cynical beyond anything he'd ever heard, Naruto couldn't deny them. Ninja were and always had been weapons to wage war. They were raised in their village, taught how to kill from a young age, and trained to be loyal to the village, to put the village above everything else. Yugito was a loyal ninja. If Hokage told her to betray Konoha, she would do it, even if she didn't like it. That thought put a damper on his feelings. "What will you do if she is an enemy?" asked Akane. "I don't know," Naruto admitted softly. Humming, Akane nuzzled her nose into his shoulder. "Well, whatever decision you make, I will be there to support you. I've decided to stick by your side even if the seal is no longer keeping us together, so I'll help you if I can." "Thanks, Akane. That means a lot to me." "It had better." While he felt only slightly reassured, Akane's words still soothed him. Even if the situation reached that worst-case scenario, even if he had to fight against someone he loved, at least he had Akane's help. Perhaps with her aid, he could avoid tragedy even if the worst-case scenario did happen. He fell asleep with those thoughts in mind. Zox another mass meeting had been called by Tsunade. Once more gathering in the large room where all of Konoha's ninja-ranked chunin and above stood, the woman in charge faced them all with the somber eyes of a leader prepared for war. "I received several reports last night," Tsunade began. "Kumo's forces have entered our border and set up a base outside of a small town called Taizuki-K. It doesn't look like they've harmed any of the citizens, but their numbers are greater than we expected. Our last estimated report put their numbers at 1,000 ninja." Soft murmurs escaped all of the ninja present except for a few like Kakashi and Naruto, who were once more standing beside the members of Team Guy and Sakura. With them were several other members of the Rookie Nine. Kiba, Hinata, and Shino stood close by, and the Inoshikacho trio was also present. Both were with their respective Jonin senseis. "What's more," Tsunade continued, raising her voice just slightly, "Iwa has finally encroached on our border as well. They've holed themselves up in a ravine located in a remote region of Hi-no-Kuni. We've finally gotten a clear estimate on their numbers. It's 3,000 ninja." Naruto sucked in a breath as even more uncertain mutterings sprang from the people around him. Konoha had a grand total of 5,000 ninja within their forces, but that was only if they were willing to include the Jonin, who made up more than 60% of their ninja force. Becoming a chunin was difficult. It required participating in the chunin exams and being promoted based on one's merits. Becoming a jonin was oftentimes even more difficult. The fact that Iwa had brought so many forces to bear told him one of two things: either they had far more elite ninja at their disposal than anyone realized, or they were bolstering their ranks with Jonin. Naruto was not sure which of those he would rather believe. "We do not have the forces to meet both Iwa and Kumo," Tsunade announced. "However, I sent a message last night to Suna and Kiri and received a reply this morning. Both of them have agreed to help us. Suna is going to meet us on the border of Kawa-no-Kuni, where our forces will combine in order to confront Iwa's army. Because their army is far greater than Kumo's, I plan on sending most of our forces to face off against Iwa." Naruto glanced around at the ninja surrounding him, wondering which ones would be sent to meet up with Suna. Would he be among them? Part of him thought it would be nice because he'd get to see Temari and Gaara again, but he also wanted to be on the force that confronted Kumo. Of course, his reasons for wanting to confront Kumo were entirely selfish as well. "Do we know if Kumo and Iwa have formed an alliance?" asked Kakashi. "We do not," Tsunade answered immediately. "In fact, judging from their erratic behavior and lack of coordination, we believe that they are not allied with each other. That said, these two forces attacking at the same time is too much to be a mere coincidence." "Then you think someone is manipulating these events?" Naruto asked. "It is entirely possible, and we certainly can't leave it out." Tsunade paused, sighed, and then continued. "However, we have no conclusive evidence that this is true either." Naruto frowned as he thought about the situation, and more specifically the lack of information they had. He'd learned how important information was thanks to Jiraiya. They currently knew nothing about the current forces beyond numbers and guesswork. What's more, they only had numbers and nothing else. They didn't know who those forces were comprised of, what they should watch out for, or even what Kumo and Iwa were planning. And if there was a force working in the shadows, then it meant they knew even less. "I'll be dividing all of you into 2 divisions, Tsunade announced. "Your division will determine where you go. Furthermore, I'll be choosing 1st and 2nd commanders for each division. 1st Division will be traveling toward Kawa-no-Kuni to meet up with Suna's forces. 2nd Division will meet up with Kiri's forces at Kifka, the next closest city to Taizuki-K. Mido Guy, you'll be in charge of 1st Division. Neji is your second in command." "Leave it to me, Lady Hokage," Guy said, snapping off a salute as he grinned. It was good to see that not even a war could affect the flamboyant man. Even his teeth were still sparkling as he smiled. "I'll do my best to serve you, Lady Hokage." Neji bowed at the waist. Tsunade nodded at them before turning to Kakashi. "You're going to be in charge of Division 2, Kakashi. Naruto will be your second in command. I understand, Lady Hokage. Kakashi was not reading his book today. Unlike most days, a grim air hung around the silver-haired Jonin. Please leave it to us, Naruto added. Right. Tsunade nodded at them both. Now let's talk about how the divisions are going to be divided. Konoha had 2,000 ninja to use in their forces since they refused to force Shinnon to fight in a war. 1,500 would make up 1st Division, while the other 500 would create 2nd Division. Of course, this meant they were still outnumbered on both fronts 2-1. However, it was Tsunade's hope that Suna and Kiri's forces would help them even out their ranks. There were only 2 problems that she could see. It's going to take some time for Kiri and Suna to reach us, Tsunade admitted. Suna will probably arrive a day or 2 after we do, and it takes at least a week for someone to travel by boat from Mizunokuni to the mainland. That means both of our forces will have to hold out until Suna and Kiri arrive to reinforce us. Given how they were outnumbered, it would normally be prudent to wait for reinforcements before attacking. The problem was that Kuma and Iwa were both already located inside of their nation. If they waited for reinforcements now, there was a strong chance either Kumo, Iwa, or both forces would reach Konoha before their allies arrived. Holding the line was the only thing they could do. As Tsunade continued addressing everyone, informing them of their plan, Naruto noticed something odd about one of the ninja in their ranks. He didn't recognize them. While this didn't mean much since it wasn't like he knew every Konoha ninja by name, this one was acting strangely. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. All he knew was that the hairs on the back of his neck were prickling. After the meeting concluded, Naruto created 2 shadow clones. One was to trail the man. The other was to trail his own shadow clone. In the event his first shadow clone was dispelled, Naruto could use the replacement technique to replace himself with a second shadow clone. It was maybe a bit much for a simple shadowing mission, but it was better to be safe than sorry. That said, he hoped he was just being paranoid. Zox, because they were traveling as an army, there was a lot they needed to do before heading off. Logistics were important. Since an army moved on its stomach, they needed to pack enough provisions to last for a while, along with munitions and supplies like tents to create a makeshift headquarters and field hospitals. Kakashi was taking care of most of that, but Naruto, as the second in command, also needed to help him. Fortunately, Naruto had shadow clones, and those made multitasking fairly easy. Since there was no telling how long they would be gone, Kakashi was playing it safe and packing enough supplies to last a division of 500 ninja 2 weeks. In the old days, this would have meant packing several carriages worth of food and supplies, but they had entered an age where all of their supplies could be carried via sealing scrolls. Of course, they still had to use a lot of scrolls. Each scroll had a limited amount of space. Generally, a single scroll could carry about 100 items, give or take a few. This was mostly because of the seals used, but it was also because of how seals worked. Sealing and unsealing items required chakra. The more items you wanted to store, the more chakra you had to use, but if you used too much chakra to store something, it would overload the seals and destroy the scroll. There had been some attempts at increasing the storage capacity, but all of them had been met with failure. Kakashi and Naruto didn't work alone. While Naruto delegated a good deal of tasks to his clone, several other ninja were tasked with helping them gather supplies. Using the storehouse near the gate, Naruto and Kakashi gathered all of the scrolls various ninja presented to them. Each person was tasked with gathering different types of supplies, and they marked what they had gathered on the scroll, which allowed him and Kakashi to tally it all up. It was important to know how many of which type of item each scroll was carrying. That way they could evenly distribute them between their forces. As they worked, Naruto told Kakashi about the strange person he had seen at the meeting. And you think this person might be a spy? Asked Kakashi after Naruto finished explaining what he'd seen. I don't know. Naruto frowned as he studied the stack of scrolls on the table in front of him and wrote something down on a sheet of paper. The problem is I have no conclusive evidence to suggest he is a spy, but something about him felt slightly off. Like I was staring at a distorted reflection. Maybe it was a genjutsu, Kakashi suggested. Maybe. Naruto didn't believe so since he was sure he'd have recognized a genjutsu. In either event, I have 2 shadow clones tailing him. The table he and Kakashi stood in front of had several stacks of scrolls. There were 20 stacks, and each stack contained scrolls that evenly divided each of the supplies between them. The scrolls were all labeled too: rations, kunai, shuriken, ninja wire, blood pills, soldier pills, medical tape, explosive notes, and so on. Kakashi's plan was to divide all of these supplies among 20 different people, who would be put in charge of a group consisting of 25 ninja. While I wish you would have informed me of this sooner, I think you made the right choice in using shadow clones to tail this person, Kakashi said at last. Thank you. Before he could finish this sentence, Naruto felt images flowing into his brain. He saw the back of a figure walking down a deserted hallway, entering a small room, and then the image went blank. When Naruto suddenly paused and snapped his head in a specific direction, Kakashi looked up. What is it? My first clone was just dispelled, Naruto mumbled. I'll be right back. Before Kakashi could tell him otherwise, Naruto used the replacement technique to replace himself with his second clone. The body replacement technique was a jutsu whose chakra usage was proportional to the distance traveled and the size of the object a person is being replaced with. Logs were great because they had close to the same mass and therefore required little chakra. Shadow clones used even less chakra unless they were several kilometers away. Anyone else would have probably burned through their entire chakra reserves using this technique at such a long distance, but Naruto had reserves to spare. The place where Naruto ended up was a dark hallway with several lateral passages. He didn't know what this place was, exactly, but the entrance was located in one of the more or less abandoned sections of Konoha. He traveled down the hall, using the memories from first clone to retrace that clone's steps. He kept his ears, eyes, and other senses on high alert. Someone had attacked his first shadow clone from behind. They were also good enough to sneak up on him, which meant he needed to be incredibly wary. It didn't take too long to reach the door. Placing just a finger against the door, Naruto sent wind chakra into and through the cracks in the door, using the wind as a sort of sonar device to map out the area beyond. There were two people on the other side, though the moment his wind chakra made contact with one of them, a burst of static filled his head. He flinched away from the door and grabbed his head. It felt like someone had decided to disrupt his technique by shoving their own chakra into the air. Shaking his head to clear it, Naruto returned to the door and sent more chakra through it. That second presence is gone. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. He peeked inside. He couldn't see anything. Clicking his tongue, he opened the door more and swept his gaze around the room. It looked empty at first, but then he spotted the lump lying on the floor. Opening the door even further, he slipped inside and made his way toward the object. The lump was actually a body. It was the body of the person he had been following. Naruto couldn't figure out how old this young man was, but they appeared at least slightly older than him. He had a pale face, black eyes that were glazed over in death, and wore all black clothing. A kunai pouch hung at his hip. There were no other identifying marks. Rolling the man over, Naruto placed a hand on the person's neck, confirming what he'd already known. This person was dead. However, when he sent chakra into their body, he found something interesting. There's foreign chakra residue inside of them. Naruto retracted his chakra, pulled out a scroll, and sealed the body. He didn't want to overpower the foreign chakra with his own. Also, by sealing the body, he was preserving the chakra inside since time didn't exist inside of a sealing scroll. Standing up, Naruto made his way out of the room and began retracing his clone's steps to leave this place. He needed to deliver this scroll to Tsunade, who would probably send the body to either the hospital for an autopsy or even the analysis team. With luck, they would learn something useful. He had a bad feeling about what had just happened. Several days passed by in the blink of an eye. He had sent the body to the hospital where Shizune and Sakura worked. After informing them of what he found, Naruto went to the Hokage and gave her a similar report on the events that had transpired. While Tsunade was worried, she told him that they wouldn't change their plans. Naruto had agreed, and several days later, preparations to move out were complete. Naruto and Kakashi stood in front of 500 ninja at the North Gate, all of whom were staring at the two of them with expectations in their eyes. There were several teams Naruto recognized, such as Team Kurenai and Team Asuma. Hinata, Kiba, and Shino were standing beside Kurenai. Right next to them was Asuma, Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru. He spotted a few other ninja he was vaguely familiar with, but they were only people he knew in passing. Sakura was also present alongside a squadron of medical ninja. It looks like everyone is ready, Kakashi said. Seems that way, Naruto agreed. They were heading out before First Division, which wasn't because they were supposed to but because it just took longer for the larger division to finish their preparations. Naruto didn't envy Team Guy for their workload. Aren't one of you going to give a last-minute speech or something? Asked Akane. She was standing beside Naruto, dressed in a simple kimono, a dark crimson dress that matched her hair. A large gap in the front made her cleavage spill out. The kimono parted along her legs to reveal milky white calves and thighs. She wasn't wearing any sandals, but that didn't surprise Naruto since she seemed to hate footwear. "Why are you here again?" asked Kakashi in what seemed like a bored tone of voice. Naruto knew better. Kakashi wasn't reading his book. "I have the Hokage's permission to come along," Akane replied with a fanged smile. "Besides, I can help. You know who I am, right?" "I am perfectly aware of who you are," Kakashi said. "And it's because I know who you are that I'm wary of letting you come with us." While Akane didn't seem to be bothered by the man's words, Naruto glanced at his former Jonin sensei. "I know you don't trust her, but I do, so please at least give her the benefit of the doubt." Kakashi sighed and scratched his hair. He didn't know of the relationship between Naruto and Akane, or at least, Naruto hadn't told him that they were intimate. That said, he was sure Kakashi suspected they were close. "Fine," the copy ninja mumbled with a sigh. "You have the Hokage's permission to join us anyway, so it's not like I can say anything." Akane grinned. It wasn't really malicious or anything, but the smugness exuding from her seemed to put Kakashi off. The Jonin turned toward the ninja of the second division, looking at the sea of faces. All of their headbands reflected in the light. "We're moving out," Kakashi announced. "Be ready to travel swiftly. We're not going to stop until we reach Kifka." Kakashi received a chorus of affirmatives, and then he, Naruto, and Akane turned around and raced out of the gate. The sound of stampeding feet followed them. Their journey had begun. Zox Tsunade had decided to head down to the hospital. The familiar white walls greeted her as she marched toward her destination, taking turns and traveling downstairs seemingly at random. People greeted her on the way. She returned their greeting with a half-hearted reply. Her mind was elsewhere. It didn't take more than 5 minutes to reach the room she wanted. The room where the body of the ninja Naruto had tailed was currently being kept. There wasn't anything special about this room. Somewhat on the small side, the main features were the hospital bed where the corpse was lying, a counter with several supplies, and some scanning equipment. Someone else was already inside. Lady Hokage. Inoiki's blonde hair swayed as he turned to face the woman and bowed. Tsunade gestured for him to not stand on ceremony. "I'm surprised to see you're still here. I figured I'd keep working on this." Inoiki gestured toward the medical table. "Call me paranoid, but I feel there's something about this body that I can't leave unsolved. I have a feeling it could prove dangerous if we don't learn everything we can." Tsunade nodded. She agreed with him, "Of course. Have you learned anything?" "Not as much as I would like, but I did learn something." Tsunade wandered up to the medical table. The body resting on it, lying with his limbs straight, didn't look like much. He was just a plain man with dark hair, average features, and the muscular physique of a ninja. She didn't recognize him, but that didn't surprise her. There was a single line running from his clavicle to his sternum. "Shizune and Sakura performed an autopsy but couldn't find anything useful," she said. "It seems he was just an average chunin with no special abilities or anything." "That's only partly true," Inoiki said. "An autopsy won't reveal anything. It only reveals what's in the body, but it says nothing about their mind." He placed a hand on the man's head. "Naruto mentioned that he found traces of chakra inside of this person. I was able to retrace the chakra to its source and discovered remnants of a jutsu being used." "Do you know what kind of jutsu?" asked Tsunade, glancing from the body to Inoiki. He shook his head. "Unfortunately, I was not able to determine what jutsu was used, but I have a guess. Let's call it a hunch." "What is it?" Inoiki paused as if considering his words. "I heard about something happening in Tsuna when Gaara was kidnapped. A man named Yura was a sleeper agent working for Sorcery of the Red Sand. A technique called Senososa no Jutsu had been used on him. Basically, a small needle is implanted into the brain's memory center and seals away the target's memories. This allows them to safely spy on the enemy for long periods of time. No one knows he's a spy, not even himself, which allows him to spy without anyone ever catching on." "And you think this person had a similar jutsu used on them?" "Yes." Tsunade bit her thumb as something unsettling caused her stomach to squirm. There were many problems with this scenario, the first being that if what Inoiki said was true, then it was possible they had several sleeper agents like this one. That was not a pleasant thought. However, there was another disquieting issue. She had no idea who the sleeper agent belonged to. None whatsoever. And that was what scared her the most. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.